Do you communicate to understand? Do you listen? Are you respectful?
Things I learned being a couples therapist for 35 years. There are three main reasons partners don't communicate very well in their relationship, and I'm going to talk about that. So the first one is emotional overload. We can get so caught up in our feelings, we don't know what to do with them, and so we just shut down. The second one is fear of conflict. We tend to associate speaking up with arguing and stress. And the third one is when people simply haven't learned the communication skills and haven't been exposed to them. I invite you to have a conversation with your partner today about which styles you both have.
Why men don't really like to talk? A lot of times it's seen as complaining. There's a lot of times it gets thrown back in our face. There's a lot of times we don't even have a moment to talk about our feelings because guess what? We have work to do. Because some of the people that we try to open up to don't even seem like they care or really listening. Because sometimes it's easiest for us in that moment to just shut up and go back to work. Because sometimes too many people in our past shown us it's not even worth trying to open up.
Most men are very bad at communication unless you don't care about it. The less you care about them communicating, the more they're going to want to communicate with you. Don't be that person that's on the phone saying, why didn't you call me back? Or why didn't you text me? Or are you too busy for me? Don't be Pygmation man. When they text, then text back. You don't have to text back right away. But don't be offended by someone who's busy. He's not going to be like your high school boyfriend that's texting you all day long and telling you you're beautiful and I miss you and I can't wait to see you again and da 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 da. If he's got to run a business, you know what I'm saying? So that's why you need a backup. If you need somebody to you need an emotional support animal or emotional support friend, you talk to them all day while that dude is out earning money. And when he texts you where you want to go for dinner or whatever, then that's the communication that is necessary. If it's unnecessary communication, then of course he's going to be too busy. Okay? Some men are grown.
So you have a partner who tends to be conflict avoidant. They shut down, get real quiet, stonewall, or just flat out leave, and they don't engage when it comes to talking about issues. So you kind of feel like you're the one who's engaging a lot or all the time, and you're the one who's bringing up the issues and you want to talk about them, and you feel like damned if you do because, well, you're the one who's always complaining or bringing up problems, and damned if you don't because you know that there's an issue and you two need to talk about it, but you feel like, well, I can't always be doing this and my partner's always avoiding me. And so now what's going on with your partner is that they're a conflict avoidant. They have an attachment style. They learn to connect most likely through their family or maybe other important pivotal relationships in their life. They learn that connection isn't good if there's conflict, if there's a problem. If we talk about things, things get worse. So by avoiding, then they believe and feel in their nervous system and in their thoughts, and it's not a highly conscious thought out thing, right? So really want to be empathetic to that. They somehow have come to the conclusion that engaging and talking about problem makes things worse, escalates issues, makes more fights, and isn't worth the headache or isn't worth having more fights. So what they've learned to do is to shut down, avoid, walk away, get away, and this is how most likely they survived in their home. Now, some people have had better homes or worse homes, but somehow they learn this survival mechanism. This is the way that I'm going to stay safe, whether it's with my partner and other people. Usually it spreads across the board, but it feels the worst when it's with you. So what do you do? I'm going to make a video about that, but for now, I want you to understand that if you have a partner who shuts down or tends to avoid talking about hard things, you have a partner with an attachment style called the conflict avoidant attachment style. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to avoid conflict, escalating, fighting. And so if you want to change this, you might start with asking, hey, I notice that you tend to avoid talking to me about issues. I notice that when we engage and talk about things that are problematic or repetitive or things that are potentially going to lead to more problems, I notice you tend to shut down, get real quiet, or you walk away. I'm curious why you think that happens for you. That's a good start. Now, there's more stuff we can talk about, but I just want to start there with you.
This one I call the unspoken pressure on relationships. Let's talk about how some partners place the burden of communication on the other partner and don't take any responsibility at all to develop their own communication skills so they can communicate clearly their desires, their wants, their expectations, what they're unhappy about, and what they'd wish to see happen in the relationship. When you place the burden of communication on one member of the relationship, you are crippling the relationship. It's going to become very difficult, first of all, for the relationship to grow. Secondly, it's going to be very difficult for you to come to a place of understanding. Thirdly, if you can't understand each other, it's going to be very difficult for you to move forward together. Fourthly, it's going to be hard to grow together. And if you can't grow together, then your relationship has no chance, to survive. Or let's say, at best, your relationship will just be surviving and never, ever, ever thriving. I see this a lot, especially when you're doing counseling, where one partner would insist that the other partner should know what they're thinking, how they feel, what they want, while they themselves have not even bothered to clearly articulate what those things are. It's almost as if that we're expecting other people to become mind readers, while we ourselves have difficulty even understanding what is the chaos that is in our own minds. It's important to attend to the fact that you're not a very good communicator and understand why. And one of the reasons why we don't communicate our desires, especially if they make us emotionally vulnerable and they make us a bit more seem like we are in need of the other person's care, love, and attendance, it has something to do with our own trauma. It's got something to do with our own insecurities. It's got something to do with our own mistrust. And it is important to attend to why is it that you don't trust, that you're insecure, that you feel super vulnerable, and you don't want to be open with your partner in that way. It's got nothing to do with the fact that the other partner does not want to attend to your needs or does not want to attend to what you want. It has everything to do with the fact that you have not learned to clearly articulate your desires, your needs, your wants, the things that you're unhappy about. And unfortunately, you are setting yourself up for resentment later because you're going to start having those internal conversations by yourself where you're beginning to judge the person, beginning to resent the person, beginning to see them as if they don't love you as much as they do, purely because you have not bothered to grow up and to learn how to communicate. And it is high time that you did so. Stop putting a burden on the other person alone.
Hi everyone, so I'm here with my partner who's sitting opposite me, and we are just having a conversation about why we think men do not communicate in relationships. So babe, women love to communicate. So what are some of the reasons why you think men do not communicate in relationships?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I feel like men in general sometimes find it hard to articulate themselves and express how they feel. I also feel like sometimes maybe from prior relationships they feel like them actually expressing themselves did more harm or more detriment to the relationship. So then they're carrying that trauma from previous relationships into their new relationship. I also feel like when they express themselves, sometimes they might not feel like it's a judgment-free zone and they're going to be judged off the back of what they have said. And then also I think sometimes they feel women may take what they say personally, which can then also cause more friction within the relationship. So on the whole, I think that all their combination of those things can cause men to not communicate well or to kind of shut down in relationships.
I feel like those are really good points. So what I would ask then is that, because some of what you said sounds to me like there's healing that needs to happen from past relationships that the man might have been in where he wasn't able to express himself and communicate. And then part of it sounds like the woman who he's in a current relationship with hasn't necessarily created a safe place for him to be able to communicate. But then how do you distinguish whether it's a her thing or a him thing? Because she might have created a safe place for him to communicate, but he's still traumatized a bit from his past relationship where he was open and vulnerable to communicate. Because I'm also quite mindful that in order for men to communicate, sometimes they have to be vulnerable. And vulnerability requires a safe place. But vulnerability sometimes doesn't happen, because if you was vulnerable in your last relationship and you wasn't able to open up, it now hinders you in this relationship, which sometimes is not the woman's fault and sometimes not necessarily the man's fault as well. So how do you see that? Do you see it more of a case of where sometimes guys are coming in with past hurt, or do you see it can be equally where women are not creating that safe place for a man?
think it's a good point. I think more so men have to take responsibility, take a lot of accountability for whatever's happened in their previous relationship, to know that this is a new relationship now, and it's not fair on him or her to be bringing past experiences into their new relationship. I also feel he's got to kind of go with how he feels and kind of like what his spirit tells him, in terms of if he feels comfortable enough with his partner to express himself. So only I think it's key that the man takes responsibility, and again, I don't think it's the woman's prerogative to know what has happened in previous relationships without having a conversation. And I think as well, as long as she's a good person, she makes him feel comfortable, makes him feel welcome, and that there is a judgment-free zone, then I feel like those are the foundations and the spaces that men need in order to build that trust and be able to become better at communicating.
So then, if a man is in a relationship and he's not communicating with his partner, at what point does he realize that this probably is a me thing, or if it's a her thing? Because I feel like sometimes those conversations are not being had, or that realization is not being had for things to move forward. And then you have the...
There are some sort of issues from the get-go.
Right. So I think they were all... There you have it. We touched on today why men do not communicate in relationships, and sometimes that is an internal thing, and sometimes that it is because the woman in the relationship is not creating a safe space. We also touched on what men can do when they are in that position, and one of the recommendations where if you are with someone who you genuinely see a future with, then that's something that you probably need to work on, because it is important, and it's also important for you to discover whether it's a you thing, and that's something where you can go and get healing for, whether it's therapy or talk to your boys or whatever it is, or whether it is a case of where the woman in the relationship is just not providing a safe place for you. So we'll be continuing with this part, because communication is a big thing. We hope you enjoyed this short little episode. Thank you. Bye.
Do you communicate to understand? Do you listen? Are you respectful? Because anyone can communicate, but how do you communicate? Because most of the time, most of the couples who end up breaking up or having a divorce, who end up in a divorce, are always fighting and trying to prove themselves right. So, yes, men should communicate, men should open up. But if it's in that situation where the man is trying to communicate and say, okay, this and this and this happened and I didn't like this, can we do it another way? And the other partner doesn't take responsibility or accountability, but is trying to defend and be disrespectful. Trust me, that marriage will end up, or the relationship will end up breaking down irretrievably. So, communication is key, but how do you communicate? Communicate.